All right. See? I'm making it spooky. There we go. It's now spooky in here. We are officially in a spooky season. It's October, and now we as adults can really have fun with this child's holiday. It's my favorite holiday, if I'm being honest. I really love Halloween. I'm one of these weirdos who's always loved it more than any other holiday. More than getting together with family, more than setting off fireworks, candy, and parties. What's not to love about Halloween? And I would not be doing my job as a fantasy tuber, a book tuber, a whatever the hell I am at this point, if I didn't go over some of the best horror reads I've come across in my entire channel's history here for you all. I really want to kind of go in depth and talk about some of the spookiest stories I've ever read in my goddamn life. No, I'm not going to be doing any jump scares in this video. I'm not an asshole, and that's not good horror. And as you will see from this video, I like good horror. I don't like cheap like I don't like cheap, that stuff. Like when the character walks in a room and the music goes and all that happens is like a cat walks by the camera. That's not horror. That's a thrill at best. So there's certain recommendations here. I'm just gonna go ahead and say like, duh, they're not like officially part of the list, but like if you haven't read Edgar Allan Poe or Lovecraft, do it. I can't believe people at this point could be old enough to fall in my age demographic here. By the way, most of you are apparently like my age or older, which I'm a bit proud of. Yeah, most people have read Poe, so I'm not gonna like officially include that in this list. Same thing with Lovecraft. And there's certain like horror books that just don't like fit the spirit of Halloween. You know what I mean? Like there's the spirit of like spooky scary, and then there's like disturbing, awful nihilism scary. And I'm not necessarily going to include those, though if you do want one of those recommendations, I will go ahead and throw my girlfriend's favorite book in here, The Road. I kind of need to talk to her about why that's her favorite book, but if you've read that book, you know why I need to have a long talk with her. But The Road is absolutely brilliant, and it is a type of horror in terms of just human depravity, depressed, just awfulness and gore, but it's not necessarily like spoopy, so I'm not gonna really include that in this list. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into a random number I didn't count of spooky stories I think will be great recommendations for you to kick off this Halloween with. Number one is pretty much the most iconic horror story ever told. It may not necessarily be the scariest book of all time. On a scale of like 1 to 10, I'll put it at like a 3. It's mainly just creepy, not scary. But I'm really surprised at the number of people who have not checked out this fantasy book, Dracula. Dracula is freaking great. I read it for this channel and have a review of it on the channel. I have a card pop up now, and it's bloody brilliant. It has had so much influence on modern society, what we consider horror, the vampire, and its absolutely iconic status within pop culture. This is the 0 point for it. There were vampire-like things before Dracula was written, but this is what cemented it in our mind as a culture. And if you have not read it already, you should. This is one of the like must-read iconic classics of all time. There's a reason it's been translated into so many languages, why there's still movies loosely or directly based on it being made all the time, and it is talked about in nearly every single horror list out there. It's brilliant. It's one of the few nearly perfect books. Now that we just had a fantasy recommendation, that being Dracula, we need to switch and go to the other side of my two favorite genres and into science fiction. And with that, I can't think of a better recommendation than the original Frankenstein. This book was written in 1818, I believe. I'll put a correction here in the edit if I'm wrong. And it holds up unbelievably well in terms of writing style, suspense, tension. Everything here works, and this really did kick off the science fiction genre to what it is today. And I have a reaction like every time I mention the fact that Frankenstein is sci-fi, where people go, ha, oh yeah, it is. Because it absolutely is. It's a scientist, a mad scientist, using science, as often in sci-fi it is science, to resurrect or create life from piecing together dead bodies. We all know the story, and I'm sure you've seen either, the movie or Young Frankenstein and seen that masterpiece as well. I'm not going to deny that's great. Mel Brooks is brilliant. But if you haven't done yourself the honor, the privilege, the gift of reading the original book, I highly recommend you do, because not only will it make you a better understanding of where sci-fi and modern culture got its roots, or seeing, again, an iconic horror figure come to life for the first time, pun intended, but you will also just love this read. I really do believe that. Everyone who's read Frankenstein, I know, is impressed by how well it's aged for how old it is, and just enjoys the read itself. One of my favorite things about this book, the author, Mary Shelley, which one, yes, a female author, basically kicked off modern sci-fi, which I enjoy alone in that, but she published this anonymously at age 20. That's incredible to see someone so young put out something that is so good, so influential, a story that is so trapped in our collective mind. We seem to be obsessed with adapting it or ripping it off every 5 to 10 years. Hollywood has been obsessed with Frankenstein's monster since really its earliest days, and I cannot blame them. It's a simple yet awesome idea, and the story really brings the concept to its fullest heights. No one really complains oh, they should have done more with this monster. No, it does everything it needs to do and should do, and the resolution of the story has a message that can be adapted or modified very easily to reflect different political or social commentary situations rather easily. I thought that was a conscious choice, but it is absolutely one of the reasons Frankenstein has continued to live on in pop culture for so freaking long. Now, I spent the first 8, or however long it was after editing, minutes of this video basically talking to the younger crowd, telling them to read classics, which is something I do quite a bit on this channel. But now I want to speak to the old heads and recommend a new phenomenon that has just absolutely rocked horror in my mind and basically justified graphic novels to me as a viable medium to convey horror and enhance a horror story overall. And that is Alan Moore's unbelievably disturbing From Hell. Almost everyone I know my age who likes reading or even has an inkling towards graphic novels has read this, because it is one of the most critically acclaimed graphic novels of all time. But a lot of the older crowd still has not caught on to this one, and I cannot recommend enough you pick up Alan Moore's From Hell. Alan Moore has a reputation of his own. He's a kooky fella, to say the least, but from a crazy mind often comes pure genius, and From Hell is absolutely a reflection of that mentality. It is historical fiction revolving around Jack the Ripper, and this real-life person who we still study and think about today. You'll notice a theme with a lot of these recommendations. There's just older characters, or real people apparently, very often, who stick around in pop culture in them. Horror doesn't add new things often. What I love most about From Hell is its blending of what's real and fiction. There are several real things about these murders, circumstances, and events that happen within From Hell that are absolutely true. You will learn more about Jack the Ripper by reading From Hell. But there's, of course, fictionalized elements as well to enhance the overall storytelling aspects. And I think that blending has never been done better than within the pages of From Hell. My old heads, you guys like me because of how much I do talk about some of the older books and how much I recommend classics to the younger crowd, but you gotta at least let me flip this once. You gotta pick up From Hell and let me know what you think about it if you have not already, because this is one of the few things I have read that has really kept me up at night wondering. But Daniel, I like fun spoopy. Well, if you like fun spoopy, that's totally fine, and I'm going to recommend something that has been frequently talked about on this channel, and I won't spend much time talking about as a result, and that is the Dresden Files. This is somewhat spooky, but more or less just a wizard detective dealing with the supernatural setting. It's more or less just fun, and I get that aspect of Halloween. I respect that aspect of Halloween, and if you haven't started Dresden Files already, just do it. It's absolutely wonderful. It's approachable for any age over 13, I'd say, maybe. I'm bad at that. But there's a reason this series is so largely loved within the fantasy community. That's because it is a rather simple idea, but a very solid execution with one of the best characters that you can really sit in first person with recently within the fantasy genre. It's got humor, it's got its scary elements, and it does absolutely, without question, fit right in with, the Halloween season. I'm surprised this hasn't been picked up as like a Netflix once a year they release a season on Halloween thing. The Dresden Files needs to be picked up by a major streaming service, not some offshoot channel BS it got before. Well, what if you're someone who doesn't want horror or fantasy or sci-fi elements at the center of your story? What if you're someone who doesn't mind those things, but you care the most about character and plot? Well, I have one of my favorite books of all time to recommend to you, one that has been adapted repeatedly and never done justice because for some reason Hollywood thinks it's a good idea to change a classic's ending, even though it is absolutely wrong and you should never do that. And that is the very well-known but often not read I Am Legend. Many people have had the ending of this book spoiled for them, which is a shame because discovering it on your own is just so This is one of these books that's tension and pacing is executed so well. Every page just feels like a continuing drawn-out note from an ever-rising violin and pitch. And by the time you reach the ending, that tension just needs to be broken, and it's broken in such a spectacular way. From the title of this book to every single beat within the plot, I think this is one of the few also just nearly perfect stories, and I cannot recommend it enough. Even if you have had the ending spoiled for you, I think turning the pages of this story are one of the best horror adventures I've ever gone on. Following a desperate man who refuses to let go of hope as he is surviving in a post-apocalyptic setting, it's brilliant. And it will forever baffle me why Hollywood has chosen to disrespect the source material repeatedly. Now I know what you're thinking. Where is my king of horror? Where is my king? Where's Stephen King? And of course, there are many Stephen King books you can pick up during the Halloween season. Not all of them. Not everything Stephen King does fits in with the Halloween tone perfectly. Dark Tower, for example. Wouldn't call that a Halloween read at all. I will be continuing that very soon, though. There's also the problem where many of his books are so big, you can't really squeeze them in just, the Halloween times, because, that's a lot. If you do want to make that level of commitment, good on you. Go right for Stephen King's It. It's awesome and it earns the reputation it has. But if you aren't quite looking for that, I know one of my fellow booktubers just gave a negative review to this book, but I solidly disagree on her negative review of The Shining. I think it is one of the best horror books I have ever read, and it is something you can crank out in a couple of weeks tops. There's a reason one of the best horror movies ever made is based off of this one right here. The Shining is horrific, it's fantastical, and it has Stephen King's trademark, brilliant character work combined with that ability to just crack and break the human mind on a level that he's rarely topped or matched at all. I think my go-to default recommendation for Stephen King horror is going to be The Shining, and if you aren't in the mood to read a Stephen King book, at least watch the movie if you haven't already. There's a reason it tops so many lists of horror movies, and don't worry, there's not many jump scares and stuff like that. This is, again, horror that earns its scares. Now, really quick, I did get one more pick from an outside consultant, my father. After telling him I was doing this video, I said, what horror story would you like to see me mentioned? And he did a fantastic pick from Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way Comes. If you're a Bradbury fan like myself, I recommend you pick it up. The guy has a poetic writing style that translates to horror beautifully. Now, we are going to end this video with one last recommendation, and that is your recommendations. I, as you can tell, like horror. I really do. Good horror. Horror that is earned. And I want you all to go down to the comments below and let me know what horror books you want me to pick up and read by the end of this October, because I'm going to try and get to at least 3 or 4 of them. I'm a big spoopy fan, and I cannot wait to see what you all are pushing for me to pick up. I've read quite a few horror books, and I will let you know in the comments down below if I have read what you're recommending, but I will also probably heart it and give it a thumbs up if I agree with that recommendation. And by the end of Halloween, we will have a fantastic list of horror books to pick up, sift through, and dive deeply in for spooky season, y'all. Anyway, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace. All right. Spooky.